Hi, welcome to class. We're the only two right now, but the other ones will show up eventually, right? I hate my life. I hate my life.
And Professor Sunreis Productions!
Hello class, Professor Sunreis here, with AGOV right around the corner and us actually having quite a good understanding of what the meta is looking like, and AGOV not gonna change all too much about the meta. It's not only gonna make a few decks stronger, but it's not gonna make everything like a new tier 0 threat or tier 1 threat. I want to give you guys all of the necessary information for each of the most important matchups, so like the top 5 matchups I assume, for you guys so that you can play those out perfectly. And in this video, we'll be taking a look at Tearlaments. Well, Tearlaments is probably like one of the strongest decks right now. In my opinion, it's one of the best decks to play right now because it's just so strong and you can just do so much with your own playstyle and your own skill. It's a very good pick for the upcoming format. With Drangling having a super strong matchup against them, it might seem like this is another necessary video, but I feel like if you don't draw like 2 to 3 Bystials plus a normal summon, you're only just one misplay away from just throwing the game. So I think technical play is going to be very, very important, and understanding the matchup is going to be key in the success in this matchup, unless you draw, of course, 2 Bystials plus a normal summon. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at everything which I do against Tier, how to make your matchups better against it, going first, going second, a little bit of like non-engine side decking patterns, stuff like that. So without further ado, don't forget to pass on the subscribe button, leave some feedback down below, and let's get right into the video. So the most important thing first, let's talk about going first against Tearlaments, and let's take a look at the end board. The most ideal end board in my opinion is going to be Seal plus Regain with Magnamut in the graveyard and a Baron on the field and a Baldrake which we added off Magnamut. Why do we go for that way? Well, Seal Regain is standard, we want to enter that every time. Having an Omni Negate in the form of Baron is ideal because it plays around both talents and an opponent's Super Poly. These are probably the most common non-engine people are playing in Tearlaments, and basically also the only non-engine. So while these are very good, you don't really have to go for it. So if you cannot go for an Omni, it's not really the end of the world because Tearlaments only plays like 5 to 6 non-engine slots at max. So the likelihood that they have one is very low, so don't like break your bone over it. And then adding a Baldrake is usually better than adding Drewsworm because we are not going for Masquerena, and Baldrake is actually a really good disruption against that. It stops like a Dark Push. It can basically act like just another Bystial because you can keep the Baldrake on board, and then if they go for the third fusion or whatever, the third tier effect, you can just use the Baldrake to banish the Garura, for example, which can be really, really good as well. So Baldrake is just the best to add up. If you have a Masquerena on the board, you can probably go for a Drewsworm, for example. You game 1, you'll go blind into the tier, you don't know it's there, you just go for Seal Masquerena. Getting the Drewsworm there is usually fine as well. Key here is playing around the talents because that can hit us quite hard. Hitting our Bystials in the hand can be very annoying. Imagine we only have that one Bystial. We use the Seal because they go into something which we really want to seal, or we use an Ash, for example, on like a Miller, and then the talents are one Bystial away, and suddenly they are able to play, and we have no Bystial to stop them whatsoever. So key is having as many Bystials as possible. How do we do that? Well, we can go for just Seal plus Regain, for example, and then use a Samsara Dragon, which we sent off the Ravine, to add back a Saronir, which we comboed with. So we end on Seal and nothing else, and then we have a Saronir plus the Magnamut add back in there. So that is very, very good. So keep that combo line in mind. While setting up our board, there's nothing really a lot we have to be careful of. It's only really Bystial. So if you've seen the Gabriel Nats list, he was playing, or like his whole team was playing 3 Drewsworm in the main deck. That is something I think very common and will probably be even more common in the foreseeable future because Tier is getting more popular, Unchained is still there, and it's just a very, very good card. So just be careful of that one random Bystial which could be coming down, but it's very easy to play around just one Bystial while setting up our combo, especially because we don't even want to go that deep, and just having that one Seal is gonna be enough. Quick side note for post AGOV Tier elements, because I don't think AGOV is gonna change all too much about Tier. I don't think Horus cards are that good. They're very good going first, but going second, they just are so bad. And if you don't have any non-engine whatsoever, like using the Horus cards, it just doesn't feel right, especially because Tier is so popular. So if you go for Zombie, Vampire, and then you suddenly mill 4 for the opponent's Tier, it doesn't seem like a good thing. But if Horus comes out, definitely go for Seal Masquerena every time, because getting rid of the permaspell is going to be so important, because that basically makes them go -1 so freaking easy. So those are everything when going first, like which I want to do. Things you don't want to do: huge end boards like Seal, Borderland, Savage, Levy, Handtrap, like the old full combo, while are really strong, and they probably will most of the time still win you the game. They're not really ideal because they lose super hard to Super Poly. and they use a lot of resources, and adding with a lot of Bystials in hand is next to impossible. Usually if you can go for a levy, 9 out of 10 times you can also just add a Bystial with the Samsara as well. So you will have to make like a few calls there. Levy can be really good, for example, if they already drew Swarmy, or if they use like an halfness in hand or something like that. If they somehow use one card of their hand, the levy becomes really, really good. Or if you already have an Ash and an additional Bystial in your hand, going for the levy is really good. But if you have nothing to stop the opponent, and the opponent did nothing to you, so you're just blinding in there, I think adding a Bystial to the hand is way better than levy hand tripping, especially in a deck which is all gas. Like hitting that one random card in the hand usually is not going to be as good as just having that one Bystial in the hand. But this will come down to a lot of things, and maybe the deck building of future Tearlaments builds will dictate what we want to go for. But usually, for me at least for now, going for the Bystial is better than going for the levy. If you're going in blind, of course, you would always go for the levy, and it will be fine if you levy them. But Bystial usually should be better against that deck, so keep that in mind. So now that we know what we want to end on, so Seal, lots of Bystials, maybe not that much of a levy, and probably no Savage because there just is not enough non-ancient to counter a Savage. Let's see how we want to use our Disruption against them. First and foremost, of course, Bystials. 99% of the time we will use our Bystials on the tier fusion effects in Grave. It becomes really, really, really good. If we only have one Bystial, we still just use it on the first tier name in Grave, just because it is just the most important thing of the deck is stopping it from popping off. Because once it pops off, it's super hard to disrupt. But in the beginning, when they're still in the early mills, hitting the first things usually is the correct play against tier. The times we don't go for a Bystial on a tier is when they don't have any materials in Grave or on the field to fuse with, and if they have not a field spell up, because then maybe you play into a talents too much. For example, they just hit like a halfness, they hit 2 random spells, or like they go for a Sharon, they pitch something dead from the hand, then you have like a tier name, and then you have like random shit, and they don't have a field spell up, then it could be fine to let the tier fusion resolve to play around the talents, because with no field spell and nothing in the graveyard to fuse with, they have to go minus super hard for that play, and at that point it is fine to let that play resolve. But just keep in mind, Bystial, their tier names, and you will be fine. Seal, the next best thing and most important thing in our end board, usually will be used to bounce our own Magnamod actually. That is a really clean play, which I like to do, is use Regain kind of early to summon a Magnamod. Think about using the Magnamod effect because it plays into a talents again, and because we plan on bouncing our Magnamod anyways, we don't need to use the Magnamod immediately, so that we can play around talents just a little bit more, make them commit a little more before they can get use out of their talents. Very, very important. So Seal, most of the time, will be used on our own Magnamod. You will have to do that before they do some big mill pushes. For example, they go for tier cash, chaining 1, and then Scream chaining 2. You probably want to use the Seal then to bounce your Magnamod, so that your Magnamod is ready to, on the new chain, hit a mill tier name. So you will have to use it preemptively and just one chain before you actually want to use the Magnamod fusion as well. Without kit colors, Tearlaments fusions are basically just like extenders, and they don't really do anything immediately on the board. So you can get away with just using the Seal to bounce the fusion. You have to keep in mind that Rhino Hardlines are available, and then they can punish you for that. Or if they have the field spell, you will always much rather use Seal to bounce a Bystial to prevent the fusion from happening whatsoever than to bounce the fusion, especially because they only have 3 fusion names anymore. So being able to get one of them out of the deck completely and out of the game for basically forever is going to be very, very important. And so you much rather always use the Bystial on a fusion effect than to use Seal on the actual fusion monster. But what is very, very good to be bounced by a Seal is a Reinhardt on board. Usually a Reinhardt on board is, at least in the beginning when the first Collider push would be available, is the only Reinhardt in there. So getting rid of that on the board is going to be very, very good. It gets it out of the graveyard as well, because it will probably get banished because it came off its own effect, and then they have a very hard time to get into a Collider Heart later on in the game. So using Seal on our own Magnamod or on a Rhino Heart is usually advised. Sometimes, yeah, you can hit a random fusion here and there, but that's usually the targets which we want to go for. Keep in mind with Regain, it's usually not correct to shuffle back a tier name unless we have a very, very bad hand and we want to draw additional Bystials or hand traps. For example, we only have one Bystial. You probably want to use Regained on that first tier name because, yeah, it does give it back for them in the turn 3, but we usually will have to get into the turn 3 anyway, so it's not gonna be something which they will get some benefit of immediately. It will only be once we are actually playing again, and then they also have to just get to it. But if we only have one Bystial, the likelihood that they can break our board is probably way too high for us to not get that free +1. So if we have nothing else but one Bystial or like one Ash, definitely use that regain as soon as possible. If you have more, 2 Bystials, a Bystial plus an Ash, a Bystial plus a Nip, whatever, definitely don't use the regain on the opponent's tier names. Yeah, the +1 feels bad not to get, but them getting cut off completely out of tier names is gonna be so worth it. Speaking of low impact hand traps like Ash and Imperm, which I'm currently playing, usually we'll just want to go for them on the normal summon, especially Imperm will always get hit on the normal summon, so hopefully a Diviner, sometimes a Rhinoheart, but even that I would probably just Imperm because it can stop them kinda immediately there. And then an Ash usually want to get hit on a Miller, or like a Field Spell, a Tear Cash on board, or a Shaman in hand. These are usually the cards which you want to Ash. There's nothing else you really want to Ash. At the point you could make like, yeah, use the Ash on the Sulliek or on the Scream, so that they don't get to the Sulliek. Yeah, that can be very good because it's like the most tempo value you can get out of an Ash, but you just cannot guarantee the Ash to be there for that moment because they can always hit something else with their mills as well. Chain blocking, the Scream Search Sulliek effect, and then the Ash basically did nothing. It's way better to just hit the very first thing which they can do, especially if we have a Bystial to back it up, because like I said, stopping tier early is the key here, because once they get rolling, they are still basically tier from the full power tier format. It's only in their early game where they really struggle to get in it, but once they're in it, shit is gonna be tough. Quick side note, keep in mind that Reduer line is a play where they can play around us having one Bystial, but that's usually fine because the Bystial will probably put on enough pressure on them in the opponent's turn anyways, but just keep in mind they do have that one line where they can play around a Bystial to get going. But in my opinion, these are the most important things to keep in mind when going first. Don't commit into a super poly, play around the talents as big as possible, get all of the Bystials available to us. Levy hand trip is not as good, full combo is not as good, and then low impact hand traps on the normal summons and their first pushes in general. These are the most important things when they are breaking our board and when we are setting up. Let's talk about when we really want to break the board, because this is, in my opinion, where the real skill test lies. Yikes, we didn't draw 2 Bystials. How do we actually navigate a Tearlaments end board? I got a very nice replay analysis for you guys to take a look at that, because I feel like this is like the quintessential Tearlaments board which we were able to see, and this encapsulates everything which I feel like we want to do in this matchup. So, like I said, sometimes it will be happening where you go second against a Tearlaments opponent and you don't have any Bystials. How does it look like? Usually you will have a Rebellion in there, or like top deck a Bystial. So at best you will hopefully have one Bystial in there at some point for the opponent's turn. So we have a Rebellion, Levy, Quick Launch, Thrust, and Save. It's still a very good hand. Imagine drawing this hand against a deck where Bystials don't even do anything. You would be very fine. So important thing is don't panic. We can still break the board even if we don't just completely annihilate them out of the game. They have a Mothman, Rhinoheart, Merly, Nessie, and Reinhardt, so they 100% of the time will be able to play. Let's see what they do here. They start out with a Mothman, go for a Rhinoheart, and because we don't really have a Bystial, let's just skim through their board and setting up, because there's nothing really a lot going on there. Yeah, they go for draw Melee, they trigger the Rhinoheart, summon the Rhinoheart, send Merly, get the first fusion, and then they mill Tear Cash with the Rhinoheart and hit a Scream with the Sulliek, a Scream to search a Sulliek. So we know that they have a Sulliek in the end board, which is going to be one of the cornerstones of the end board. So we have to keep that in mind. They have Dangerous on board, so there will probably be a Beatrice coming down later on. Also, one of the more standard things on the end board is going to be a Beatrice or some form of getting into their tier engine, into their mills again. Let's see what's happening here. I feel like the thing is bugged. So the thing was bugged, but here we are again. They do get their Scream Search, like I said, Search Sulliek, and from here on they do have a Beatrice. They do have a Dangerous line available for a Beatrice, but they also do have Bahamut Shark available to get into a Toad. Toad is pretty standard now, and a lot of people have been skimping on the King of the Swamp, which is, in my opinion, the correct call. I don't really like the card in tier whatsoever. I did test with the deck as well, and it just felt so bad to draw, and it wasn't even like a crazy mill anyways. So Toad is the go-to, like summon negate, omni negate whatsoever. It's really good. Giving back Tear Cash is always good. Very strong card. Also, keep in mind that this card is gonna probably be on a lot of end boards for Tearlaments as well. And then they go for a cross sheep, probably also a cornerstone of the end board. I'd say this a lot, but I feel like this is like the perfect example of like a tier of a Kashtira end board, a tier end board, because it basically has everything which there is to it. So they summon the melee into the cross sheep zone, triggering the cross sheep to get a Rhino Heart. And then they go for Beatrice. Effect Beatrice can now send another tier name to fuse into a Mud Dragon to do a Dweller, which is like the standard thing the deck wants to do. Dweller, while good against us, is not an auto win, so it's definitely not a like auto lose here. We do draw an Absolouter, so that's additionally a very good draw there. And let's see how we play this out. We do activate the Rebellion so that we always have the ability to contest something which they want to mill. They will just totally awesome that here, and that is fine for us because at least then we trade 1 for 1. We do pick up the Drew Swarm here because the Magnemite is never going to resolve anyways. Much rather have the Drew Swarm to use its effect in the graveyard if they don't already have a Dweller up, or at least force out the Dweller, so that's pretty solid. Some people in the call were saying that summoning Drew Swarm here is the correct call because we will be able to resolve the Drew Swarm anyways, and then the Thrust is alive immediately. But I feel like getting using Drew Swarm here, and if they don't totally negate, this is where the problem could start, because then we would be forced to go into battle phase, and then we really will struggle to deal with all of that on the board. Because if we use Drew Swarm and then they don't toad, first of all, we cannot even crash into it. Like, we cannot run over it. We can only crash into it because it does get the 500 boost. More on that later. Spoiler alert. We might have lost because of that. So using Drew Swarm here, and if they don't negate, which I feel like is the correct play, would make it super awkward, because we have to figure, if it's the Drew Swarm and then negate it, Thrust, Talents, take like Beatrice or whatever, force basically the whole board out is gonna be insane. But the problem is, if they don't negate, we can use Rebellion, Drew Swarm. They would just, on the summon of the Drew Swarm, use their Dweller. Then the Thrust is alive, which will just get negated by the Toad. So, and then we cannot run over anything, we cannot use Rebellion to get rid of anything, so I don't think it's the correct play to do so. Just show the Drew Swarm so it's there to contest the Toad when we want to, but don't actually use it. Because we do have a very good line here with Quick Launch into Abs. They do start to get the mills going. Thrust is alive now, which is all we want to. And then they use the Hafness. We use our Drew Swarm on that to bait the Toad so that our Thrust is alive. That will Toad negate. That's super fine. This will get sent to the graveyard. It will get sent to the graveyard, and then it will be summoned on the board and set. They resolve the Hafness for a Dracostapelia. Then they use Cross Sheep, I believe. Yeah, they go cheap 1, Toad 2. Toad, very important getting the tier cash back, because one of the most important things when breaking the board is keeping in mind that Sulliek only works if they have a Tearlaments on board. So play around that accordingly, because Sulliek is one of the best pieces in the end board. It plays around the Dark Ruler. It's a negate, so that's really good by itself, but it also does put in work into the tier engine, getting into the mills, getting into the shufflers for the additional engine, stuff like that. So it's going to be one of the best pieces on the end board, and having an answer for it and playing around it, knowing when it's alive and when not, is going to be crucial. So they do summon the Reinhardt here, go for the second fusion, effect Sharon to fuse into a Kaleido Heart here with the Reinhardt there. One random mill, I think a Nessie or something, or like was it a Mudrake? I don't know. It wasn't Nessie. Or was it Toad? It was Toad. To go into Kaleido Heart and then effect Kaleido Heart on the Abs. That's super fine. We didn't expect Abs to resolve anyways because of the Dweller, so now we can thrust into Talents and we can turn off the Sulliek. Gonna be very important. So we can Talents, take the Kaleido Heart. They chain the Dweller because they're scared that we will just take it. I probably wouldn't even go for that because we don't really have any graveyard effects alive anyways. And now we want to get to the most important aspect of winning those games. And in my opinion, the most easy thing to do against Tearlaments is resolve a Magnemite. We can't do that here right now, but that's fine. And then borrow land, get rid of their whole board. That is usually how I try to deal with the deck, because the follow-up here is not crazy. Remember, the only thing they do have right now is Sulliek plus tier cash. So if they don't hit anything crazy here with the tier cash mill, like the 5 mills they can get off tier cash on field and graveyard effect, they don't really have anything. So getting rid of their whole board here, easy clap. That's all we really need to do. So we use the Striker Dragon here. They do Dracostapelia that. I don't know if that's the correct play. It is definitely fine, but I feel like you could go for something later on, especially if they know what we want to do. So we normal summon Seyfried, and here we figured, oh wait, we need to go for the Pisty line. We go for a Dark Summon, and now they use the Tear Cache to banish the Scream, effect Tear Cache to, let's pause here a second. They mill a Scream, so they can get a Saliek, and they mill a Tear Cache, so they can get the mills immediately. They do hit a Shayama, so that's also some follow-up, but in the end, that's all fine. And then they mill a Miller, and they don't really hit anything there as well. We do hit some random names, so it's all fine and dandy. And here we can... oh, now they hit the Tear Cache, okay, sorry. And they milled nothing else. So, ooh, they just didn't hit anything whatsoever. Even though they hit a Kelbeck, they didn't hit any Shuffler, so they have no disruption left against us. Very good spot for us. So here we can use the Levy to banish something. We could have probably also just used Dark here to summon the Collider Harp. We would have gotten Saliek on that anyways, and then the Levy, it all comes down to the same thing. Levy getting rid of anything here on the board doesn't really do anything, just because it's not really valuable resources for them anyways. So we get rid of the Druze Worm, we try to trigger it. No, we don't trigger it with the Druze Worm, we just use Levy to pop the Beatrice, because these are just free games. And if we did everything correctly here, we would have had just game, because now we do have a Boral End line available, and Boral End negate Dweller, so the attack boost gets lowered, and then we can just run over everything, and then summon the... what's it called? The Tracer should be enough. We do miss that, and we lose the game because of that. But in the end, I still think this was a very good showcase of how to navigate the board. Just keep in mind all of the resources which they have on board and what they translate to. And for that, we will get back into the theory, because we will get completely sacked here by the top deck. Look, oh, 800 life points. Imagine them having 1000 attack points less on the board. Maybe we would have won here. Steel Pass could have won us the game here, until they summon a Fenrir. But let's get into the theory again and see what the actual end boards of them look like. So like I said, I feel like this is the prime example of a tier end board, and we have everything here which you probably to some degree see on a tier end board. What I think is always gonna be there is like any sort of Omni Negate. It just rounds out the end board, so it usually makes sense for the tier player to go for it if they can go for it. So usually this will be either via Diviner into Baron, maybe even like some Jet Synchron lines with the Diabellstar, but imagine a Baron or a Toad via the Bahamut line. A Saliek also always gonna be there, or a Meta Noise if they play it post-side, for example. So always keep in mind that. And then they will have, I feel like 2 to 3 lines of getting back into some mills and some tier action in the opponent's turn. This can either be a Cross Sheep, this can be a Beatrice, like in this case, this can be a Tear Cache in the hand, this can even be a Hafners in the hand, this can also be a Redoer with a Sharon underneath. So keep in mind, or like even a Rhinoheart works as well if they have something in their hand. So keep in mind, you usually will have 2 to 3 lines of that. Cross Sheep can summon a Rhinoheart or can summon a Diviner. Beatrice can send a Miller, a Shuffler, or just a hard name. Tear Cache can mill something randomly. Redoer can activate Sharon to get into Kaleido Heart, etc, etc. Extras can be Shufflers in the graveyard. Once you are at this point and they have a Shuffler in there, it becomes exponentially even harder. Or maybe an additional Baron, or in this case a Dweller, if they know what you're up against. I don't know if you blind Dweller in the current format, it's decent, but if you, for example, are a Flu play here, we probably just annihilate that board just as we did with our hand. But keep in mind, these are the things: a Saliek, Omni Negate, 2 to 3 lines into tier stuff, and then extra Shufflers, Dwellers, depending on the quality of their hand. Maybe a random Bystial in the hand as well as some non-engine. And like I said in the replay, them getting to that point means that we didn't draw any Bystials to stop the opponent, so at maximum we will be having 1 Bystial, and we want to get usage out of it. So in this case, we did trade it with a Totally Awesome because we had Thrust, which was such an important card, but sometimes it's better to use the non-engine to stop the Toad, and then use the Druze Worm to stop one of the tier pushes. This gets exponentially better if they don't really have a lot of guaranteed tier pushes. Maybe they bricked a little bit or whatever, or we nipped their board and they only have that one Cross Sheep line and they want Beatrice. So if we can stop the Beatrice and they don't get into a fusion on the board and they cannot summon anything onto the Cross Sheep zone, the Cross Sheep is dead. So us using that 1 Bystial is going to be very, very important to get the maximum value out of it, and we always want to use the 1 Bystial to stop the opponent's plays rather to use and enhance our own plays. So don't use your one Bystial to set up a regain very early on. It's not going to be worth it. Always use the one and only Bystial which we have to try to stop the opponent plays. Think of it as exclusively non-engine and not engine for your own play. And like I said earlier, the win con, at least in my opinion, is to push through all of the disruption and then end on one small dragon level 4 or lower plus a dark, because if the dark resolves, this is a borrowed end line which will deal with all of their board and usually will be good enough to stick on the board. Yeah, if they have a Saliak on the board plus like 2 to 3 cards in the hand, it's not gonna work, but if they are at that point and you've dealt with all of the disruption, then probably you are gonna win anyway. So keep in mind, getting into Borderland is gonna be key. How you do that, dark plus 1 level 4, because dark is always gonna be alive against the deck with playing so many darks. Other win cons are very similar. Getting rid of most of the board with Bystials. For I don't know how that even would work. Maybe we draw into a Bystial and they milled like a Seyfried plus a Lubellion or a Samsara, and suddenly we have 2 to 3 Bystials for their turn. Just having a shit ton of Bystials running over their stuff and then playing Seal Control afterwards is definitely also a win con. Probably not gonna happen all too often, but keep that in mind. And we can do similar things to Borderland with access code. For example, we know that they have one tier name in there. But we resolve the Magnamid, so going into an access code to deal with their board so that we can get rid of Saliak, especially if they already use Saliak with a random mill, can be very, very good, because Saliak is really good against a Borderland. It's one of the few decks in the meta which can actually touch Borderland, so Borderland loses a little bit of its value there. So if they have an alive Saliak and they can just deal with a Borderland, going for access code, getting rid of their end board, especially if we resolve the Magnamid, can be very good, because oftentimes one Bystial can be enough against this deck, especially post turn 1, when we maybe use one Bystial against one of their tier names already, and they only have 2 tier names left. If you can Bystial in turn 3 or turn 4 on their second to last tier name, and they only play with one tier name, it's basically impossible for them to win afterwards. So that is very, very good to keep in mind. In my opinion, because Tearlaments is such a complicated deck and the end boards vary so much, I just struggle to figure out a way to comprehensively give you guys the information which you need on how to play around. So we will be taking a look at every engine / part of the end board disruption tool they have available and what parts of your tools it can stop, so that you can play around accordingly, and then you know, okay, they do have a Shuffler in the grave. That means that they can hit my boot sector effect, which usually is really good against the deck because they mill random rockets. We can get rockets in the graveyard ourselves. So boot sector usually a huge push against the deck. The shufflers can stop a boot sector. They can stop a Seyfried Samsara at back. They can stop a Lubellion to coming out, so they can stop regain access. They can stop the Bystials target, so the Bystials will stay in the hand. Usually that's a plus for us, because then we can just keep the Bystial in hand and stop their next play, next turn. Random lights or darks to stop Chaos Dragons usually won't come up all too much, or they can pop, they can turn into a pop with the field spell up. So Shuffler can translate into all of those disruptions. So while playing around the opponent's board and you know that they have a Shuffler, keep that in mind when sequencing your plays, because there's never gonna be that completely 100% right answer. I mean, there is, but it's super hard for me to tell you guys about it because it's always gonna vary between so many variables. Just keep in mind what the shufflers can do and then sequence your plays around accordingly. What the fusions can do. So while we talked about Tearlaments, fusion graveyard effects, what the actual fusions do in your turn is actually kind of like Luster now. It's either an Imperm via the Dracostapelia, or it's gonna be a shuffle into the deck via the Kaleido Heart. You can add a pop onto it if they have a field spell. Just check the graveyard what fusion materials are there for a Kaleido Heart. They always will need the one tier name, the one Rhino Heart, and then additional Aqua. Usually that means a Nessie, sometimes a Toad, I believe, Yeah, a Toad, and then maybe a Gamma Seal or a King of the Swamp if they play it. For Dracostapelia, they of course just need one random fusion in there, so sometimes it can even be good to use the Bystial on something else other than the tier name, for example, to get rid of the one fusion. If they don't have a Kaleido Heart, suddenly their fusion just whiffs. That can also be very, very good. But in the end, just keep in mind a tier fusion and grave, if they have the guaranteed line into that. For example, they have a Beatrice, that means they can either have an Imperm, a Shuffle back, and if they have field spell on that, add the pop to that as well. Next more important piece, Saliak usually will be stopping a Link 2 or a Striker Dragon in my opinion. These are probably the best cards which can stop. It can also stop a Seyfried pitch from hand, so usually you want to not do that if they have a Saliak up. and usually Salic will lead to some form of fusion play or a shuffler. So if they start to use Salic, they will probably start to mill, and these disruption can turn into fusion or shufflers. That's why they usually will do it on the link 2, for you to have committed a little more resources into the play, so that they can get value of the shufflers, they can get value of the fusion shuffle, like shuffle back, or like the imperm of the fusion itself. So keep that in mind. Salic usually turns into more disruption afterwards. But like I said, also keep in mind that Salic here is test. It needs a tier element on the board. So if you play Kaijus, for example, and they do only have one tier name on there, easily using the Kaiju on the tier name can be a very, very good play. Even if they start to mill 2 there, it doesn't matter. As long as the Salic is turned off, it can stop them from getting into more and more disruption. Omnis usually will get hit anything, which is the best thing. Usually it will hit your best card or the one which pushes the most pressure. It can be a Bystial, it can be a Thrust, it can be an Evenly, it can anything which you want to start to break the board. Usually it's just that one clean 1-for-1 trade with super heavy tempo favored for them. It will usually turn the game from an auto win for you if your card would resolve, like an Evenly. Imagine Evenly here this board, that would be insane, right? So it would turn a gameplay from that to actually having to trade resources with the opponent. So keep that in mind. Omni Negate, you will tell when they will use their Omni Negate 99% of the time, looking at your hand and seeing what you have here. Like here, using that on the one Bystial we have, or a Thrust, is 100% the cards which they are going to hit. There's nothing else really to hit there. Last piece, ways to get into tier engine. Like I said, we have a Beatrice here. Beatrice can set anything. It can be a shuffler, it can be a hard fusion, it can be a miller if they need more than just one fusion, it can be follow-up, it can be everything. Beatrice is the best card that Tearlaments has available to it right now. Keep that in mind. Then you have Cross Sheep. Cross Sheep is probably the worst of the cards because it actually needs something else to resolve. So most of the time they won't be ending on a fusion on the board. Sometimes there will be a Kaleido Heart there, but most of the time they don't have a fusion on the board, so they actually need to resolve their Beatrice, Sentier, or like their any of the other mills first to summon a fusion like they did in the replay, and then to summon like a Rhino Heart or a Diviner out of the graveyard. So keep that in mind about Cross Sheep. You can stop the play of a Diviner summon with the Bystial. So if you have an additional Bystial, maybe keep it until this play for them to Cross Sheep summon Diviner. But other than that, if you have a way to stop the first push of a tier elements name, for example with Beatrice, usually Cross Sheep isn't gonna be that big of a threat for you unless they already have Kaleido Heart on the board in one of its own. When they then summon a tier cache, which is the third push they have into a tier name, then they can even get some value out of the Cross Sheep afterwards. And then the last card there's Redua. Redua usually will be used in their own turn to get a tier name into the rotation, because like I said, it does play around Bystials quite effectively, but the value you get of that, because there's just no kit colors, isn't as great. So Redua is also a way to keep in mind that they can get into their tier engine. Oh man, that was a lot of information, but I hope you guys could learn something from it. If you have any more questions for specific scenarios, side decking stuff, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. But I think Tearlaments is just such a complicated matchup, and it has so much variety, especially because our deck is also not that linear, playing against a super non-linear deck. There's just gonna be so many game states, so covering all of them is gonna be next to impossible. I just hope that you could learn something from setting up our own board and then breaking a board, what the most important aspects are, what our actual win cons are, and then the disruption the opponent can put to stop us, so that we can solve the puzzle and know, okay, they have this, this, and that. If we sequence our plays like that, we can still get to those 1 or 2 win cons, which we have when going second, if we didn't draw 2 Bystials plus a normal summon, of course. Hope you guys enjoyed today's class. Class is dismissed. You guys are free to leave. Professor Sunreis out. Peace.